In the quiet neighborhood of Pine Grove, nestled between old oak trees and well-kept lawns, Evelyn Carter walked home from another day of teaching. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as she carried a stack of fourth-grade papers to grade. Aleko, 45. Evelyn had been teaching at Pine Grove Elementary for nearly 2 decades, long enough to watch her students grow up, graduate, and sometimes return with children of their own. Evelyn loved teaching, despite the long hours and modest pay. Her classroom was a sanctuary of colorful posters, plants on the windowsills, and inspirational quotes about kindness and perseverance. "Every child deserves someone who believes in them," read the hand-painted sign above her desk, words she lived by each day. Lately, though, one student had been weighing heavily on her mind. Michael Thompson had started the school year as a bright-eyed, curious boy with a talent for math and drawing. But over the past 2 months, something had changed. The spark in his eyes had dimmed. His homework, once meticulous, now came in wrinkled or sometimes not at all. Most troubling were the long-sleeve shirts he wore regardless of the weather, and the way he flinched whenever someone moved too quickly near him. "Something's not right," Evelyn murmured to herself as she unlocked her front door. Her cat, Pepper, greeted her with a gentle nudge against her ankles. "That boy is carrying something heavy, and it's not just his backpack." The next morning during art class, Evelyn noticed Michael struggling to reach for supplies on a high shelf. His sleeve rode up just enough to reveal purple-yellow bruises encircling his thin wrist. Her heart dropped to her stomach. She'd seen similar marks before, on other children throughout her career, marks that told stories no child should have to tell. "Michael, would you help me organize these books after class?" she asked casually, making sure none of the other children could hear. He nodded, eyes downcast. When the bell rang and the classroom emptied, Michael hung back, nervously picking at a loose thread on his sweater. "Those are beautiful drawings you've been doing," Evelyn said, pointing to his art folder. "Would you show me some of your recent ones?" Michael hesitated before slowly opening his folder. Inside were dark, chaotic drawings, storms, shadowy figures, a small stick figure hiding in corners. One picture showed what looked like a house with angry red scribbles throughout. "Can you tell me about this one?" Evelyn asked gently, pointing to the house drawing. Michael's voice was barely above a whisper. "That's where the yelling happens. And the hurt." Evelyn felt a knot form in her throat. She thought of her grandmother's stories, how she'd suffered at the hands of an alcoholic father until a neighbor had finally intervened. That neighbor had changed her grandmother's life, and in turn, Evelyn's own existence. Some chains of pain needed to be broken. "Michael, is someone hurting you at home?" she asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The boy's eyes filled with tears. After a long silence, he gave a tiny nod. "My dad gets real mad sometimes," he said. "Especially when he drinks the special juice. Mom tries to stop him, but then she gets hurt too." Evelyn took a deep breath. She'd made reports to Child Protective Services before, but the system was overworked and underfunded. Reports sometimes went uninvestigated for weeks. Children fell through the cracks. She knew what she needed to do. "Michael, I want you to know something very important," she said, kneeling to meet his eyes. "What's happening is not your fault, not one bit of it, and I'm going to help make it stop." The next few days became a whirlwind. Evelyn filed reports, made phone calls, and documented everything she observed. The school counselor, Mrs. Rivera, joined her efforts. When they learned that CPS couldn't investigate immediately, Evelyn felt a fire ignite within her. "These bruises won't wait," she told the principal, showing him the photos she'd carefully taken with the school nurse present. "This child needs help now." When Michael's father, Thomas Thompson, was called to the school for a meeting, he arrived reeking of alcohol and immediately became defensive. "You've got no right poking into our family business," he growled at Evelyn. "The boy's clumsy, always has been. Falls down the stairs, runs into doors, not my fault." But Evelyn stood her ground, even as Thomas's anger filled the small conference. "Mr. Thompson, we all want what's best for Michael. There are programs that could help your whole family through this difficult time. Thomas stormed out, and that night, Michael didn't come to school the next day, or the day after. Evelyn couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Michael's fearful eyes, the bruises on his small wrists. On the third day, she called the police for a welfare check, then drove to the Thompson house herself. She arrived just as officers were escorting Thomas into a police car. Michael and his mother stood on the porch, both with fresh bruises. A female officer had her arm around Mrs. Thompson, who was sobbing uncontrollably. "Teacher!" Michael cried when he saw Evelyn's car. He ran to her, throwing his arms around her waist. The female officer approached. "Are you the teacher who made the report? Thank goodness you did. Things escalated badly here last night." The next hours, the painful truth emerged. Mrs. Thompson had been hospitalized twice in the past year from her husband's beatings. She had no family nearby, no support system, and was too terrified to leave. Michael had been trying to protect her, often putting himself between his parents during his father's rages. "He's going to kill us one day," Mrs. Thompson whispered in the hospital waiting room, where she was being treated for a sprained wrist and bruised ribs. "I just know it." When social workers explained that Michael would need emergency foster placement while his mother recovered and made arrangements for their safety, a cold fear washed over Evelyn. Foster care, while sometimes wonderful, could also be traumatic. Children were sometimes separated from siblings, moved far from their schools and friends, or placed with caregivers who were in it for the wrong reasons. Without fully thinking through the implications, Evelyn heard herself say, "I can take him." Temporarily, the social worker looked surprised. "You'd need to be certified as an emergency foster parent. There's a process." "Then start the process," Evelyn said firmly. "I have a spare bedroom. I've had all the background checks for teaching. Michael knows me and trusts me. I can keep him in the same school, maintain some normalcy while his mom gets back on her feet." That evening, as she hastily prepared the guest room in her small house, Evelyn questioned her impulsiveness. She lived alone with just her cat for company. Her modest teacher's salary barely covered her own needs, and what would people say about a black woman in her mid-40s taking in a white child from the neighborhood? The whispers would surely start. But then she remembered her grandmother's words. "When someone needs shelter from the storm, you don't worry about what the neighbors think of your umbrella." When Michael arrived with a social worker, clutching a small backpack containing all he had, his eyes were red from crying. Evelyn showed him the room she'd prepared, with fresh sheets, a nightlight, and a shelf of books she'd pulled from her classroom collection. "You're safe here, Michael," she told him, her voice gentle but firm. "No one is going to hurt you in this house, that's my promise to you." That night, as rain pattered against the windows and thunder rumbled in the distance, Evelyn heard small footsteps in the hallway. She found Michael standing outside her bedroom door, trembling. "The thunder," he whispered. "Dad always got angrier when it stormed." Evelyn led him to the kitchen, where she made hot chocolate with tiny marshmallows floating on top. They sat at her small table, listening to the storm, while Pepper the cat curled around Michael's legs. "Did you know," Evelyn said, "that thunder is just clouds bumping into each other, making a lot of noise but causing no harm to anyone below?" Michael considered this, taking a small sip of cocoa. "Like how words can be loud but don't have to hurt?" Evelyn smiled, surprised by his insight. "Exactly like that. Very smart thinking." For the first time since she'd known him, Michael's shoulders relaxed. A tiny smile appeared, then vanished, as if he wasn't sure he was allowed to feel happy. But it was a beginning, a small crack in the wall of fear that had surrounded him. Outside, the storm continued. But inside Evelyn's kitchen, with marshmallows melting into cocoa and a cat purring softly beneath the table, a different kind of weather was taking hold. The forecast called for healing with a chance of hope. The first week with Michael was harder than Evelyn had imagined. Each night brought nightmares that sent him screaming into wakefulness, his small body shaking with fear and bedsheets soaked with sweat. During the day, he jumped at every sudden noise. The mail slot opening, a car backfiring, or Pepper the cat knocking something off a shelf. Evelyn learned quickly to announce her movements. "I'm just reaching for the book, Michael," or "I'm going to turn on the blender now." The spare bedroom slowly transformed with each passing day. Evelyn brought home art supplies and Michael covered the walls with bright pictures, sunrises, beaches, and forest scenes, places he said he wanted to visit someday. These new drawings contained no angry red scribbles or shadowy figures, though he kept those older drawings in a folder under his bed, as if unable to fully let go of the darkness. At school, Evelyn had to navigate a delicate balance. She arranged for Michael to see the school counselor, Mrs. Rivera, 3 times a week. But in class, she was careful not to show him special treatment. Still, word spread quickly in the small community. "Is it true you took in the Thompson boy?" asked Mrs. Wilson, another 4th-grade teacher, during lunch break. Her voice carried a hint of judgment. "Isn't that a conflict of interest? And aren't you worried about, well, you know?" "About what exactly?" Evelyn asked, though she knew perfectly well what Mrs. Wilson was implying. "Well, you being, and him being." Mrs. Wilson glanced around the teacher's lounge. "People might talk, is all I'm saying." Evelyn set down her sandwich. "People always talk, Diane. Meanwhile, a child has a safe place to sleep at night. I know which one matters more to me." The conversation ended there, but it wasn't the last time Evelyn would face such questions. When she took Michael to the grocery store that weekend, an elderly woman stared openly at them, her disapproving gaze following them down the cereal aisle. At the park, a father pulled his son away when Michael approached the swings. "Don't let it bother you," Evelyn told Michael when she noticed his downcast eyes. "Some people have very small worlds. That's their problem, not ours." Meanwhile, the legal process ground forward at its own slow pace. Thomas Thompson was facing charges of domestic abuse and child endangerment. Michael's mother, Linda, was staying at a women's shelter, attending therapy and job training programs. Twice a week, Evelyn drove Michael to supervised visits with his mother. "You're an angel," Linda told Evelyn during one such visit, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know how to thank you for protecting my boy when I couldn't." "You're protecting him now," Evelyn replied gently. "By getting stronger, by breaking the cycle. That takes more courage than most people ever have to find." One evening, about 3 weeks after Michael came to stay, Evelyn received a phone call that made her blood run cold. Thomas Thompson had been released on bail. His lawyer had argued successfully that he wasn't a flight risk, and the overcrowded jail system had one less inmate to worry about. That night, Evelyn checked the locks twice before going to bed. She moved Michael's bedroom to the back of the house, away from the street, and called a security company to install an alarm system she could barely afford. Every unfamiliar car that drove past made her heart race. "Is my dad going to come here?" Michael asked over breakfast, pushing his cereal around the bowl without eating. "No," Evelyn said firmly. "The court has ordered him to stay away from you and your mom, and this house is safe." But that afternoon, as Evelyn was grading papers in her classroom after school, her cell phone rang. It was her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patel. "Evelyn, there's a man at your house," she said, her voice tense. "He's banging on your door, shouting. I've called the police already." Evelyn's hands shook as she gathered her things. "Is Michael home? Did he get off the bus?" Michael usually walked the 3 blocks from the bus stop to her house and let himself in with the spare key she'd given him. "I don't think so," Mrs. Patel said. "I haven't seen him come home yet." The 15-minute drive from school to her house was the longest of Evelyn's life. As she turned onto her street, she saw police cars with flashing lights parked in front of her home. Thomas Thompson was being handcuffed and placed in the back of a patrol car, his face red with rage. There was no sign of Michael. Evelyn parked haphazardly and ran toward a police officer. "There's a boy, my foster son. He should have been home from school. I can't find him." The officer tried to calm her. "Ma'am, we haven't seen any child here. This man was alone, causing a disturbance." Panic rising in her chest, Evelyn called Michael's name, looking up and down the street. That's when she spotted Mrs. Patel waving from her front porch. "He's here, Evelyn. The boy is here with me." Inside Mrs. Patel's house, Michael sat at a kitchen table with a glass of lemonade and a plate of cookies, looking surprisingly calm. "I saw him from the bus window," Michael explained. "My dad. So I asked the driver to let me off one stop early, and I remembered you said Mrs. Patel was nice, so I knocked on her door instead." Evelyn gathered him into a hug, relief washing over her. "That was so smart, Michael, so smart." That night, after Michael had fallen asleep, Evelyn sat on her front porch, the events of the day replaying in her mind. The stars spread across the sky like diamonds on black velvet, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. The world felt both larger and smaller than before, larger in its dangers, smaller in the tight circle of protection she had drawn around one small boy. The following week brought a court hearing. Evelyn sat in the back of the courtroom watching as Thomas Thompson's lawyer argued for reduced charges, and Linda Thompson trembled in the witness stand, recounting years of abuse. When the judge ordered Thomas to enter a 6-month residential rehabilitation program for alcohol addiction and anger management, Evelyn felt a complex mix of emotions: relief that he would be contained, hope that he might actually change, and fear of what would happen when he eventually came out. Outside the courthouse, Linda approached Evelyn and Michael, her face showing new determination. "The shelter has helped me find an apartment," she said. "It's small, but it's in the same school district. I start my new job next week." Michael looked up at Evelyn, his expression a mixture of hope and sadness. Evelyn knew what he was thinking. His mother was getting better, which was wonderful, but it also meant his time in Evelyn's home would end. The safety he had found there felt precarious again. That evening, Evelyn helped Michael with his homework at the kitchen table. "You know," she said carefully, "even when you go back to live with your mom, my house will always be open to you. You can visit any time, have sleepovers, call me whenever you want to talk." Michael nodded, his pencil moving across his math worksheet without really solving any problems. "But it won't be the same," he said finally. Evelyn reached across the table and took his hand. "No, it won't be the same. But different doesn't mean worse. Your mom is fighting so hard to make things better for both of you. And I'll still be your teacher. I'll still be in your life. Promise?" Michael's voice was small. "I promise," Evelyn said, and she meant it with her whole heart. The following month brought more changes. Linda's apartment was ready, and she had completed the court-required parenting classes. The social worker conducted home visits and reported that the new living situation was appropriate for Michael to return to his mother's care. The day Michael packed his things to leave Evelyn's house was sunny but cool, with a breeze that carried the first hint of autumn. Evelyn helped him gather his clothes, books, and art supplies. Pepper the cat seemed to sense something was happening and stayed close to Michael all morning, purring loudly. "You can come visit Pepper too," Evelyn said, trying to keep her voice light. "She's going to miss you terribly." When Linda arrived to pick up Michael, she brought a small gift for Evelyn, a framed photograph of Michael smiling, taken at the park the previous weekend. "So you don't forget his face," Linda said. "As if I could," Evelyn replied, swallowing the lump in her throat. Michael hugged Evelyn tightly before leaving. "Thank you for saving me," he whispered against her shoulder. Evelyn knelt down to look him in the eyes. "You're the brave one, Michael, remember that. And this isn't goodbye, it's just see you tomorrow at school." After they left, Evelyn's house felt emptier than it ever had before. She wandered from room to room, straightening things that didn't need straightening. In Michael's bedroom, the spare room again now, she found a drawing he had left on the pillow. It showed 2 houses side by side, with a small figure walking between them. Above the drawing, in careful letters, he had written, "2 homes are better than 1. Evelyn placed the drawing on her refrigerator, held in place by a magnet shaped like a paintbrush that Michael had made in art class. Outside her window, the neighborhood continued its usual rhythm: children riding bikes, neighbors collecting mail, a delivery truck stopping at the house across the street. Life moved forward, changed but unbroken, like a river finding a new path around an obstacle. And somewhere not far away, a boy who had known too much darkness was unpacking his things in a new apartment, safe with his healing mother, carrying with him the knowledge that storms pass, that help sometimes comes from unexpected places, and that family can be both born and chosen. The seasons changed, painting Pine Grove in autumn colors, then winter white, and finally spring green. Throughout these changes, Evelyn watched Michael bloom in his own way. Though he no longer lived under her roof, he remained a constant presence in her life. Every Tuesday and Thursday after school, Michael would come to Evelyn's house while his mother worked late shifts at the hospital cafeteria, where she had found steady employment. These afternoons fell into a comfortable routine. First homework, then a snack, and finally an hour of what they called healing time, activities that helped Michael process his feelings about the past. Sometimes they painted together, brush strokes capturing emotions too complex for words. Other days they planted flowers in Evelyn's small garden, Michael taking special pride in nurturing seedlings into full bloom. "The hurt doesn't go away all at once," Evelyn explained one afternoon as they kneaded bread dough together in her kitchen. "It's like these tiny bubbles in the dough. You have to work with it, give it time to rise, and even then, some bubbles remain. But that's what makes the bread good, all those little spaces filled with air." Michael considered this, his hands sticky with flour. "So, the bad stuff that happened, it can become something good?" "Not the bad stuff itself," Evelyn said carefully. "But how we grow around it, how we learn to rise despite it, that can be beautiful." The counseling sessions continued, though reduced to once a week. Mrs. Rivera, the school counselor, told Evelyn that Michael's progress was remarkable. "Some children take years to develop the coping skills he's building," she said. "He has an exceptional capacity for resilience." "He has exceptional support," Evelyn replied. It wasn't just her. Linda Thompson had transformed from a frightened victim into a fiercely protective mother. She attended every parent-teacher conference, joined the PTA, and created what she called safety plans for every possible scenario in their lives. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her actions. Thomas Thompson's presence, however, cast a long shadow. From the rehabilitation center, he wrote letters expressing remorse and asking for forgiveness. Linda shared these letters with the family therapist but didn't respond directly. "Words are easy," she told Evelyn during one of their now frequent coffee meetings. "I need to see changed behavior over a long time." Evelyn admired Linda's strength but worried about the future. The rehabilitation program would eventually end, and Thomas would re-enter their lives in some capacity. The thought kept her awake, some nights, staring at her bedroom ceiling, wondering if the fragile peace Michael had found would shatter. One rainy Saturday in April, Michael arrived at Evelyn's door unannounced, soaking wet and breathing hard. He had ridden his bike nearly 2 miles in a downpour. "Dad called Mom," he said as Evelyn wrapped him in a towel. "He's coming home next month. The program is finished." Evelyn felt a cold weight in her stomach but kept her voice steady. "Come, sit down. Let's talk about this." In the living room, with Pepper curled on his lap, Michael explained what he knew. Thomas had completed the 6-month program and received positive evaluations from his counselors. He had maintained sobriety, attended every required session, and even volunteered to stay an extra 2 weeks for additional anger management training. The court had approved his release with conditions, continued outpatient therapy, regular check-ins with a probation officer, and a gradual supervised reintegration with his family. "Mom says we're not living together right away," Michael said. "He's getting an apartment nearby. We'll have visits with a social worker present at first." Evelyn nodded, relieved at Linda's caution. "How do you feel about seeing your dad again?" Michael was quiet for a long moment. "Scared," he finally admitted. "But also, I don't know, curious. He was nice sometimes before the drinking got really bad. He taught me how to ride a bike and build model airplanes." He looked up at Evelyn, his eyes troubled. "Is it wrong to want to see if that dad could come back?" "No, honey," Evelyn said gently. "It's not wrong at all. It's natural to hope for the good in people, especially people we love. Just remember that your safety comes first, and you don't have to do anything that feels wrong or scary. The first, supervised visit took place in a neutral location, a family counseling center with comfortable rooms designed to feel home-like. Evelyn drove Michael there, waiting in the reception area, while he met with his father and the social worker. Linda had an unavoidable work training but would attend future sessions. When Michael emerged an hour later, his expression was unreadable. They drove home in silence, raindrops racing each other down the car windows. "He cried," Michael said suddenly, as they pulled into Evelyn's driveway. "My dad. He said he was sorry so many times. He showed me his sobriety coin thing. 6 months without drinking." Evelyn turned off the engine but made no move to leave the car. This moment felt important, a space Michael needed to fill with his own thoughts. "He looks different," Michael continued. "Thinner, calmer in his face. He asked about school and my art, and he actually listened without interrupting." He turned to Evelyn, his eyes searching her face. "People can really change, can't they? Not just saying it, but really deep down?" Evelyn chose her words with care. "Yes, they can. It's one of the most powerful things about being human, our capacity to learn and grow. But real change takes time and constant effort. It's not a straight line. There are usually setbacks along the way. Like when you're learning to ride. A bike? You fall off, but you have to get back on? Exactly like that," Evelyn said, smiling at his insight. "The important thing is that you keep your helmet on while he's learning. Figuratively speaking, you keep your protections in place." Over the next few months, the supervised visits continued. Thomas remained sober, kept all his appointments, and found steady work as a carpenter's assistant. The social worker's reports were consistently positive, noting the appropriate boundaries Thomas maintained and his willingness to take responsibility for his past actions without excuses. By midsummer, the court approved unsupervised day visits. Michael would spend Saturdays with his father, going fishing at the local pond, visiting the science museum, or working on model airplanes in Thomas's small apartment. He returned from these outings with animated stories and a growing sense of cautious optimism. Linda remained more reserved. "I'm glad Michael is reconnecting with his father," she told Evelyn during one of their coffee talks. "But I'm not ready to trust Thomas with my heart again. Maybe never." "You don't have to," Evelyn assured her. "Co-parenting doesn't require romance or even friendship, just mutual respect and communication about Michael's needs." As the new school year approached, bringing with it Michael's transition to 5th grade, a more complicated conversation arose. Thomas had been consistent in his recovery for nearly a year. His probation officer recommended reducing the restrictions further. The question of overnight visits, and eventually the possibility of Michael dividing his time between both parents' homes, was now on the table. One evening in late August, Evelyn invited both Linda and Thomas to her home to discuss this new phase. It was the first time all 3 adults had sat together without professional mediators present. The tension in Evelyn's living room was thick enough to touch. Thomas, looking nervous but determined, spoke first. "I want to thank you, Ms. Carter, for everything you've done for my son, for stepping in when I was—" He swallowed hard. "When I was the danger in his life. I know I can never fully make up for the harm I caused, but I'm committed to being the father Michael deserves from now on." Evelyn studied him carefully. The man sitting on her sofa bore little resemblance to the angry, intoxicated figure who had pounded on her door a year ago. His eyes were clear, his hands steady. When he spoke about his ongoing recovery work, he did so with humility rather than defensiveness. After nearly 2 hours of honest, sometimes painful conversation, they reached agreements about the path forward. Michael would begin spending 1 weekend a month at his father's apartment with additional time during school breaks. Linda would maintain primary custody, and all 3 adults would continue meeting regularly to discuss Michael's well-being. As Thomas and Linda were leaving, Michael came downstairs in his pajamas, having been sent to bed earlier. "I couldn't sleep," he explained, looking shyly at the 3 adults standing awkwardly in the entryway. "Is everything okay?" Something remarkable happened then. Without prompting, Thomas knelt down to Michael's eye level, maintaining a respectful distance. "We're figuring things out, buddy. It's going to take time, but we're all working together because we love you. That's what families do, even when they look different than they used to." Michael looked from his father to his mother, then to Evelyn. His face broke into a smile that illuminated the dim hallway. "I have the weirdest best family ever," he declared. After Thomas and Linda left, Evelyn tucked Michael back into bed in the room that would always be his whenever he needed it. "You know," Michael said sleepily, "I used to think good things only happened in books and movies, like when the sad parts end and everything gets fixed." Evelyn smoothed his hair. "Real life is messier. The sad parts don't completely end, they just become part of a bigger story." "Our story," Michael mumbled, as he drifted toward sleep. "Yes," Evelyn whispered, "our story. Later. Time has a way of slipping through fingers like fine sand." For Evelyn Carter, the years after Michael left her home passed in a blur of ordinary days punctuated by moments that anchored her life in meaning. She continued teaching, welcoming new groups of fourth graders each fall, watching them grow and move on each spring. Some students stayed in touch. Most disappeared into their own lives, carrying small pieces of what she had taught them. Michael was different. He remained a constant, even as distance grew between them. Through middle school, he still visited, regularly spending weekends at her house when his father had work trips or when his mother needed a break. They baked cookies together, planted tomatoes in the garden, and talked about books late into the evening. Pepper the cat grew older and more sedentary, but always saved her loudest purrs for Michael's visits. By 8th grade, Michael had developed a passion for photography. Thomas, continuing his recovery and working steadily as a carpenter, saved up to buy his son a decent camera for his birthday. Michael documented everything: the changing seasons in Pine Grove, his mother's proud face when she was promoted to cafeteria manager, Evelyn grading papers on her front porch. He had an eye for finding beauty in ordinary moments. "You're going to be famous one day," Evelyn told him after he showed her a particularly striking sunset shot that made the sky look like it was painted with fire. Michael shook his head, embarrassed by the praise. "I just like capturing things before they're gone," he said, "like making memories solid." The summer before high school, a change came that neither of them had anticipated. Linda received a job offer from a large hospital in California. Better pay, better hours, and most importantly, a fresh start away from the shadows of the past. It was an opportunity too good to refuse, but it meant uprooting Michael, just as he was about to begin high school. Thomas, who had rebuilt his relationship with his son but maintained a clear boundary with his ex-wife, decided to remain in Pine Grove, where his carpentry business was finally thriving. He and Linda worked out an arrangement. Michael would live primarily with his mother but spend summers and some holidays with his father. The night before they left for California, Michael and his mother came to Evelyn's for a goodbye dinner. The summer air was heavy with humidity and the scent of Evelyn's famous peach cobbler baking in the oven. They ate on the back porch, swatting away mosquitoes and pretending that their hearts weren't breaking a little. "We'll video call every Sunday," Linda promised, reaching across the table to squeeze Evelyn's hand. "And you'll come visit during winter break. We have a spare room all ready for you." "California's so far," Michael said quietly, pushing corn around his plate. At 15, he had grown tall and lanky, his voice deepening, but his eyes still carried the same thoughtful expression Evelyn remembered from the boy who had once hidden his bruises beneath long sleeves. "Distance is just geography," Evelyn replied, though her own throat felt tight with unshed tears. "The important connections stay strong no matter how many miles are between people." After dinner, while Linda packed the car with the last of their belongings, Michael handed Evelyn a carefully wrapped package. "Don't open it until tomorrow," he instructed. "After we're gone." The next morning, Evelyn watched from her porch as Linda's packed car pulled away, Michael's hand waving from the passenger window until they turned the corner and disappeared from sight. The house felt suddenly too quiet, too still. Pepper meowed, questioningly, searching for the boy who had always slipped her treats under the table. With coffee growing cold beside her, Evelyn finally opened Michael's package. Inside was a handmade photo album. On the first page, Michael had written, "The family we built." The pages that followed contained photographs spanning the years of their connection. Michael and Evelyn making snowmen in her front yard. The three of them at Michael's middle school graduation. Thomas and Michael fishing at the local pond. Linda and Evelyn laughing over coffee. The final page held a recent portrait of Michael, looking directly into the camera with clear eyes and a confident smile that showed how far he had come. Evelyn kept her promise to stay connected. Sunday video calls became a ritual, though as Michael navigated high school in his new California town, the calls grew shorter and less frequent. He joined the yearbook committee, developed a close group of friends, and even started dating. His life expanded in ways that necessarily left less room for distant connections. Christmas visits happened for the first couple of years, but then, Evelyn's mother in Georgia needed care after a stroke, and Evelyn spent her school breaks traveling south instead of west. Phone calls replaced video chats. Eventually, birthday cards and holiday greetings were exchanged, with promises to catch up properly soon. Promises that life's busy currents swept away before they could be fulfilled. By the time Michael graduated high school, 4 years had passed since Evelyn had seen him in person. She sent a gift and a card full of pride and good wishes. He called to thank her, sharing his excitement about starting college in San Francisco to study photojournalism. They spoke for nearly an hour, falling back into their easy rhythm of conversation, but at the end, there was a tacit understanding that their paths had diverged in ways neither had expected. Life continued its relentless forward motion. Evelyn's mother passed away after a long illness. Pepper the cat, who had been Michael's special friend, died peacefully at the age of 17. Evelyn herself faced a breast cancer diagnosis that, though caught early, required surgery and radiation that left her exhausted for months. Through it all, she continued teaching, finding solace in the classroom even as her body recovered. Thomas Thompson still lived in Pine Grove. Occasionally, Evelyn would see him around town, at the grocery store or the local diner. They would exchange polite greetings and brief updates on their lives. Thomas had remained sober all these years, had remarried a kind woman who worked at the library, and had become something of a mentor to other men struggling with addiction. "Michael's doing well in California," he told her during one such encounter. "Graduated college with honors. Got a job with some online news magazine. Travels all over taking pictures of important stuff." His face shone with fatherly pride. "I'm not surprised," Evelyn said, meaning it. "He always had something special in him. That something special grew because of you," Thomas replied, unexpectedly serious. "I've never properly thanked you for that, for seeing what was good in my boy when I was too broken to see it myself." As Evelyn approached her 60th birthday, retirement loomed on the horizon. Her joints ached in damp weather, and the energy required to manage a classroom of fourth graders depleted her more each year. The school organized a retirement party, with former students and colleagues gathering to celebrate her 3 decades of service to Pine Grove Elementary. During the YI's party, her phone pinged with a text message. It was from Michael, the first direct contact in nearly 2 years. "Happy retirement, Ms. Carter. Sorry I can't be there. Life is crazy busy but good. I think of you often. Love always, M." Attached was a photograph of a sunset over what appeared to be the Golden Gate Bridge, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple that took her breath away. Even through the small screen of her phone, his talent was evident. Evelyn felt a swell of pride mixed with a quiet sadness for the distance that had grown between them. She texted back a simple, "Thank you. It's beautiful. Just like your spirit. Love, E." The months after retirement felt strange, untethered. Evelyn's days, once shaped by school bells and lesson plans, now stretched before her with an abundance of freedom that sometimes felt more like emptiness. She volunteered at the local literacy center, joined a book club, and started taking watercolor classes at the community college. She adopted 2 kittens from the shelter, not to replace Pepper but to fill her quiet house with purring life again. On a crisp October day, nearly 20 years after Michael had first come into her life, Evelyn was planting bulbs in her front garden when her phone rang. It was Linda Thompson, her voice tight with emotion. "Evelyn, I'm sorry it's been so long," she said. "Something's happened." Michael was covering a story in a conflict zone overseas. There was an incident. He's okay, physically at least, but he's struggling. He's been having nightmares, panic, attacks. The doctors say it's PTSD. Evelyn's heart clenched. "Where is he now?" "Back in the States, staying with me for a while, but..." Linda paused. "He asked for you, Evelyn. He said he needs to go back to where he first learned that healing was possible." A week later, Evelyn stood at her front window, watching for the taxi that would bring Michael from the airport. Her house was clean, the guest room, his room, prepared with fresh linens and a vase of late-blooming dahlias on the dresser. She had baked his favorite peach cobbler, though the peaches weren't as good this late in the season. When the taxi finally pulled up, Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she opened the front door. The man who stepped out was both familiar and a stranger, taller than she remembered, leaner with subtle lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He carried a battered camera bag over one shoulder and a small suitcase in his other hand. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the years that had separated them. Then Michael set down his bags and crossed the distance. Michael settled into Evelyn's home as if he had never left, though everything was different now. At 35, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that occasionally cracked to reveal the rawness underneath. The first few days, he slept long hours, his body catching up on the rest it had been denied during his time in conflict zones. When he was awake, he moved slowly through the rooms, touching familiar objects like he was reacquainting himself with old friends, the chipped blue mug he had always used for hot chocolate, the patchwork quilt Evelyn had made during her first year of retirement, the creaky third step on the staircase that had never been fixed. "It smells the same," he told her one morning over coffee. "Cinnamon and books and something else I could never name. It always meant safety to me." Evelyn, now in her mid-60s with silver threading through her dark hair, smiled at him across the table. "And what does safety smell like exactly?" Michael thought for a moment. "Like possibility. Like the air after rain when everything feels clean and ready to grow." They fell into an easy rhythm. Mornings were for coffee on the back porch, watching birds visit the feeders Evelyn had installed years ago. Afternoons sometimes found them walking through the neighborhood, Michael taking photographs of small details most people would miss. Water droplets on spider webs, the pattern of cracks in an old sidewalk, light filtering through autumn leaves. Evenings were for talking. At first, Michael spoke only of safe topics: his mother's health, good; his father and stepmother's cabinet-making business, thriving; his own career successes, substantial. But as days passed, other stories began to emerge in the gentle darkness of Evelyn's living room, illuminated only by a single lamp. "I've seen things I can't unsee," he said one night, his voice low. Children pulling other children from rubble, a hospital bombed while doctors were still operating, a father carrying his dead son for miles because there was nowhere to bury him. Evelyn didn't offer platitudes. She simply listened, her presence a sturdy shore for the waves of his pain to break against. "The worst part is," Michael continued, "sometimes I'd be taking pictures instead of helping. My camera between me and them, like I could somehow stay separate from it all, but I couldn't. It got inside me anyway." "Of course it did," Evelyn said softly. "That's what makes you good at what you do. Your heart stays open even when it hurts." Gradually, the nightmares that had followed Michael across oceans began to subside, not disappear. Evelyn heard him pacing sometimes in the pre-dawn hours, but their grip loosened enough for him to breathe more easily, to laugh more readily, to look forward rather than constantly over his shoulder. One Saturday morning, about 3 weeks into his stay, Michael announced he wanted to bake bread. "Like we used to," he explained, already pulling flour and yeast from Evelyn's pantry. "Remember how you taught me that working the dough was like working through feelings?" Evelyn remembered. They spent the morning with Flower dusting their clothes, kneading and shaping, talking about small things, the new coffee shop downtown, the kitten's latest antics, the community garden Evelyn had helped establish at her old school. The familiar motions of their hands working side by side spoke as eloquently as their words, telling a story of continuity amid change. As the bread baked, filling the house with its homey scent, Michael pulled out his laptop. "There's something I want to show you," he said, opening a folder labeled simply, "Project." The screen filled with images. Powerful, haunting photographs of people rebuilding their lives after various forms of devastation. A woman planting vegetables in soil that had been a battlefield. Children attending school in a building with missing walls. An elderly man playing violin amid the ruins of what had once been a concert hall. "It's called After the Breaking," Michael explained. "I've been collecting these for years whenever I could find moments of, I don't know what to call it, not hope exactly. Persistence, maybe. Resilience," Evelyn suggested, studying a particularly striking image of a girl flying a homemade kite above a refugee camp. "Yes, that's it," Michael nodded. "I've been offered a book deal, but I've been stuck. Something's missing." Evelyn scrolled through the photographs again. "They're beautiful, Michael. Heartbreaking, but beautiful." "That's just it," he said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "They tell other people's stories. Important. Stories that deserve to be told, but I've been hiding my own." The timer for the bread beeped, interrupting the moment. As they moved around the kitchen, slicing the warm loaf and spreading butter that melted instantly, Michael seemed lost in thought. It wasn't until they were seated at the table, steam rising from their plates, that he spoke again. "I think I need to go back to the beginning," he said. "My beginning. The story that led to all the others." The following day, they drove to Michael's childhood neighborhood. The small house where he had lived with his parents looked different. New siding, a fenced yard, a basketball hoop in the driveway. A family with young children clearly lived there now. Michael took a few photographs from the car but didn't suggest getting out. They visited his old elementary school next, Pine Grove, looking smaller than he remembered, but essentially unchanged. The playground where he had once hidden from bullies during recess. The classroom where Evelyn had first noticed his bruises. The principal's office where his father had been confronted. "It's strange," Michael said as they walked the empty Sunday corridors, permission granted by the current principal who remembered Evelyn fondly. "In my memory, everything here was bigger, more extreme. The dark places darker, the safe places safer." "That's how childhood works," Evelyn replied. "Everything is heightened because you're experiencing it all for the first time." They continued their journey into the past, visiting the courthouse where Thomas's case had been heard, the community center where supervised visits had taken place, the park where they had celebrated Michael's return to his mother's care. At each location, Michael took photographs, not just of the places themselves, but of details that caught his eye. A worn wooden banister, polished by thousands of hands. A child's mitten forgotten on a bench. Late autumn light slanting through. Bare trees. "I think I'm starting to see it now," he said as they drove back to Evelyn's house in the gathering dusk. The through line from then to now. That evening, while Evelyn prepared dinner, Michael disappeared into the guest room. He emerged, just as she was setting the table, carrying something wrapped in tissue paper. "I found this when I was packing to come here," he said, carefully unwrapping the package to reveal a small, worn sketchbook. "My old drawings from when I first stayed with you." Together they turned the pages, witnessing the visual diary of a child's pain and healing. The early drawings were chaotic, dark, the storm clouds and shadowy figures Evelyn remembered. As the pages progressed, light began to appear, first as tiny pinpricks, then as widening beams breaking through darkness, and finally as the dominant element, with darkness reduced to manageable shadows. "You kept them all these years," Evelyn said, touched by the discovery. Michael nodded. "They remind me that change is possible, that darkness doesn't last forever." He closed the sketchbook gently. I think this is what my project has been missing. The personal thread that connects me to all those other stories of resilience. Over the next 2 weeks, Michael worked with renewed purpose. He spent hours at his laptop, organizing photographs, writing text, occasionally asking Evelyn to read passages and offer feedback. He contacted his publisher, excited about the new direction. His energy was contagious, filling the house with a buzz of creative intensity. Between work sessions, life went on. Thomas and his wife drove up from their new home 2 counties over for dinner one evening. The conversation was easy, unmarked by the tension of earlier years. Thomas, now in his 60s with gray hair and reading glasses, spoke openly about his ongoing recovery work, the weekly meetings he still attended, the young men he mentored, 20 years sober next month, he said without pride or shame, just a simple statement of fact. One day at a time, like they say. When Linda called from California for their weekly video chat, Michael shared his project progress with animated gestures. Mom, I'm adding our story to the book, is that okay? Linda, her face softened by time but still recognizably beautiful, nodded on the screen. It's more than okay. It's important. Suffering in silence never helped anyone. As October gave way to November, a crisp chill settled over Pine Grove. Michael's nightmares had largely subsided, replaced by productive days and restful nights. His planned week-long visit had stretched to nearly 2 months, but now the time had come for decisions. My publisher wants the final manuscript by January, he told Evelyn one evening as they sat by the fireplace. And there's an exhibition possibility in New York in the spring. Evelyn felt a familiar, bittersweet tug. Happiness for his success mingled with the knowledge that he would leave again. That's wonderful news, she said, meaning it despite the underlying sadness. I've been thinking, Michael said, staring into the dancing flames. What if I didn't go back to California right away? What if I rented a place here to finish the book? Maybe that little cottage by the lake that's always for lease in the off-season? Hope flickered in Evelyn's chest. You'd stay through the winter? At least,